Ellen Jo, the very first limited DPS in ZenlessZoneZero, is surprisingly getting her second rerun, this time alongside Ban Wei in version 2.4. With this, you might be wondering how she's been doing recently with characters like Dylan being released, and this is also on top of a recent dev announcement where they teased changes to old characters, with Ellen maybe also being theorized to be a part of this, since her rerun is otherwise quite weird. Don't worry though, as in today's video, we'll cover everything you need to know about playing Ellen in version 2.4, her future, and how you'll currently be able to make her as strong as possible. But as a quick disclaimer, some of the footage shown today is from the creator beta server. However, with this out of the way, if this video helps, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Without further ado though, let's break down everything you need to know about Ellen in version 2.4. Ellen's gameplay loop revolves around building up her resources through dash attacks or special attacks, dealing damage outside of the stun window, then stunning the enemy with your dazer, and unloading all of Ellen's resources during said stun window. Now, despite this being the case for almost every DPS in the game, because of her high damage share in basic related abilities, this does mean Ellen's out of stun damage specifically is quite noteworthy. As a result, though out of stun damage is typically less relevant for other characters, Ellen does deal a decent amount of damage when even not in a stun window. Now let's break down her kit. Ellen's special resource is called Flash Freeze Charge, and she can generate it through several ways, including her EX special and Charge Dash attack. This resource is relevant for Ellen since this is what she'll use to unlock some of her newly added abilities like Glacial Blade Wave, but ultimately it's most important since it's how she'll be able to use Flash Freeze Trimming's final hit, which also happens to be one of Ellen's highest DPS abilities. In regards to said charges, however, her EX special generates 1 per cast, and her Charge Dash attack instead will generate 3 per cast. As mentioned before though, these charges were really only relevant in the past since you needed them to activate Ellen's third basic, which did cost 1 freeze charge to activate. However, with Ellen's buff, this is no longer the case as she now needs 2 charges if she wants to activate the new Glacial Blade Wave, which we'll break down soon. Regarding Ellen's core passive, however, this provides a significant 100% crit damage boost to certain abilities in her kit, but it is locked behind first using a Charged Scissor Strike, which isn't really that relevant since you'll be using it anyway. That said, with Ellen's buff, this does now apply to her Chain, Ultimate, and the new Icy Blade / Glacial Blade Wave that were added again as previously mentioned, but this is pretty nice for Ellen's overall damage. Her additional ability was now changed to activate when your team includes either a stun agent, a Victoria housekeeping agent, or an ice agent, but though this was previously nice so that Ellen could be paired with a character like Lighter, the newly released Dylan does actually perform amazingly with her too, making this nice especially in the past, but still technically nice now if you plan on pairing Dylan and Lighter together. Once this condition is met though, Ellen gains access to a stackable ice damage buff that can build up to 10 stacks, with each stack providing 3% ice damage lasting for 10 seconds. Ellen's basic attack is a 3-hit combo though that deals physical damage. However, the most important ability among her basic related skills is Flash Freeze Trimming, which again deals some of the highest damage in her kit. That said, this ability can also be held down, or you can repeatedly press the button on the third hit in order to extend the sequence. Additionally, after her buff, once performing the third hit of her basic attack, dash attack, dodge counter, or quick assist, pressing the attack button once again will consume 2 Flash Freeze stacks to unleash Glacial Blade Wave. To be clear, this ability does take quite some time to activate despite having a decent multiplier, but as we'll see later in the combo section, this can sometimes take up too much time to perform during a stun window. Ellen was also granted a new follow-up ability in the form of Icy Blade, and though it does deal less damage than Glacial Blade Wave, this animation is shorter, doesn't have a flash freeze cost, and is also automatically cast at certain times after other abilities. Therefore, the skill is pretty nice as added damage. Ellen's EX special attack has 2 parts though. At first, she performs a heavy tail whip that deals ice damage and generates 1 flash freeze, but once pressing EX twice, she instead unleashes a series of slashes, also granting 1 flash freeze. Worth noting here though is that in addition to said resource generation, the second part of her EX special, known as Sharknami, is also one of the highest damage dealing skills in her kit too. What's nice about both abilities though, regardless of how much energy you have, is that Ellen can seamlessly transition into the third hit of her basic attack once either skill is completed. Ellen's assist is mainly useful for applying some daze and giving her a quick transition into the roaming state, but on top of this, she does gain the quick charge effect once performing a quick assist, which is pretty relevant if you're trying to quickly generate charges. Ellen's dodge also has a lot built into it, but it is worth fully reading and learning since they help with Ellen's performance a decent amount too. With this though, performing a perfect dodge will grant her the quick charge effect, and to add to this, she can double press or hold dodge to enter her roaming state. While in the state, Ellen runs quicker, has an atmosphere change that's both iconic and still very cool to this day, but more importantly, tapping basic once while in the state will grant 1 flash freeze charge and perform a quick scissor strike. Holding the button though still grants 3 flash freeze charges, and as you'd expect, this is still your primary and best method of building flash freeze. Ellen's chain attack doesn't generate any flash freeze, but it does deal good damage, making it valuable to use the double chain attack trick with, but that That said, the ability does have a decently long animation attached to it, so keep this in mind when planning out your fights, especially with characters like Astra. Regarding her ultimate, this is still a good source of damage, but not much has changed since version 0.0 in regards to it. However, with Dylan being released, the ability to use this ultimate twice is definitely nice, adding to Ellen's overall damage potential. As for Ellen's skill priority, you should focus on upgrading her core skill and basic attack equally first, followed by her chain attack and special attack. After this, investing in her dodge, and finally her assist will be ideal, but overall she's a DPS, so investing in anything damage related will always be helpful. Now let's break down Ellen's combos. When it comes to Ellen's gameplay pre-stun window, she focuses primarily on using her dash, building up resources, and making sure to avoid overcapping when possible while waiting for the enemy to be dazed. As a result, her combo looks like the following: quick assist from a support or defensive assist onto field, use a charged dash attack, which should be shortened because of the quick charge effect, follow this with glacial blade wave, and after this you'll perform flash freeze trimming, aka her basic attack 3. After flash freeze finishes, performing icy blade will be next, and once icy blade is out, you can swap cancel, but this is technically optional and is really just if you're trying to avoid long animations. Alternatively, if you find yourself with extra energy, you can quick assist / defensive assist again onto field, use the shortened charged dash attack, perform glacial blade wave again, use flash freeze trimming, follow this with her EX special if she can afford to do so, end this with flash freeze trimming again, and enjoy a free icy blade after this, and swap cancel at the very end of it all in order to again avoid any long animations. Now once reaching a stun window, however, the combo changes to the following: apply buffs with supports, chain attack with Ellen, cancel chain attack, EX special, swap cancel before the EX special triggers the stun window, trigger chain with another agent, chain attack with Ellen, perform her ultimate, EX special attack, flash freeze trimming aka her BA3, and then end with icy blade. Alternatively, you can exchange the EX special that's swap canceled to flash freeze trimming, and following the icy blade that comes alongside it, you can of course swap cancel this as well and save yourself some energy. Now let's move to Ellen's build. Ellen's signature, Deep Sea Visitor, remains her best in slot weapon, offering 24 crit rate as its main stat. Its passive increases her ice damage by 25% and crit rate by 10% whenever she hits an enemy with her basic, but on top of this, she can gain another 10% crit rate by dealing ice damage with her dash attack. But though this is clearly her best option, a warning and PSA / reminder that you do actually need to perform a dash attack if you want the extra crit rate here, as it's often something that people forget about. Another great option for Ellen though is Heartstring Nocturne. Now I've already made a dedicated video and also talked about Heartstring Nocturne in other videos, and it's true, this is a great account-wide investment as it's decent for many attack characters, and even though Ellen can take advantage of the second part of said passive, it's still a great engine just for the stats alone, increasing her crit damage by 50% and crit rate by 24%. With this, the engine is actually only about 8% worse than her signature, but this is actually pretty impressive considering it's a fire-based engine whose passive she can't use, and also just impressive because of how close it is to her signature in terms of performance. Next up, we have Myriad Eclipse, which offers 24% crit rate as its main stat, and a passive that increases crit damage by 45%. This also grants a passive effect for 3 seconds, reducing enemy defense by 25%, but while this does mean it can outperform Heartstring Nocturne, it does also depend on how well you can maintain the absolute zero effect. Overall though, it's about 4% worse than her signature weapon, which is shockingly close, and honestly a pretty decent argument for why you might not need her signature. Now, I would normally move to the A rank options from this point, but since Ellen's last release, Cordis Germina, aka Seed's signature, has also shown itself to be an incredibly strong general engine, as the crit rate and powerful ignore defense effect pair perfectly with Ellen's gameplay. As a result, despite Nocturne being one of the better options in the past, Cordis Germina has performed amazingly with only a 6% gap in performance compared to Deep Sea Visitor. For A ranks, Mercado Desire is a solid option, offering 20% crit rate, but hitting enemies with EX special or a chain attack grants Ellen a 6% attack increase, which doubles if the enemy has an attribute anomaly applied to them. Now keep in mind, however, that this is an event engine and not everyone may have access to this, but if you're curious, Mercado Desire is about 20% worse than her signature. Lastly though, we have Starlight Engine as the craftable and most accessible option, but this will be the best choice for free-to-play or newer players. Its main stat grants 25% attack, and performing a dodge counter or quick assist will grant an additional 12% attack increase, but even with all this, however, the engine is still 22% worse than Ellen's signature, though as a craftable weapon, this actually isn't too bad and kind of respectable. For drive disc options, Ellen can run either 4-piece Woodpecker Electro or Hormone Punk depending on your playstyle, but Woodpecker Electro is definitely easier to maintain, while Hormone Punk offers higher performance but may require more effort to keep its buff active. You may at this point also be considering Polar Metal, but generally speaking, this is a tougher passive to activate, especially if you're pairing Ellen with characters like Dylan or Lighter, or especially if you aren't pairing her with any other ice agents either. On the topic of Dylan, however, we should talk about Puffer Electro, Electro, as it is one of Ellen and pretty much any attack agent's strongest sets if you're pairing them with Dial-In. The attack increase, ultimate damage bonus, and even the pen ratio are all helpful in this case, especially when pairing Ellen alongside other percent damage buffing agents, but once again, this is tied specifically to Dial-In, as otherwise the passive and its uptime is much more difficult to maintain. For the two-piece options, Ellen has a lot of flexibility. She can choose from Branch and Blade Song, Puffer Electro, Astro Voice, or Polar Metal, and all will provide useful benefits in different ways. As always though, you should still pick the set with the most usable substats. For main stats, you'll look for crit rate or crit damage on 4th slot, depending on your W engine choice, pen ratio, attack percent or ice damage on the 5th, and finally attack percent on your 6th slot. For substats, you'll prioritize crit rate and crit damage equally, followed by attack percent, flat attack, and finally flat pen. But again, as usual, this is just a typical attack agent who wants generic crit and attack based stats. As for her stat line, you'll be aiming for roughly 2800 attack, 80 crit rate max if you're running her signature, and 150 crit damage. Now let's talk about Ellen's team options. With the addition of Dial-In to ZenlessZoneZero, Ellen's new best team is definitely Ellen paired with Dial-In, with the final slot of Astra Yao being interchangeable at times with Lighter. This team cleared consistently under 60 seconds and had scores varying in the 25 to 27,000 range in Deadly Assault, but overall the team felt more synergistic with Ellen's gameplay goals, as the off-field nature of Dial-In and pretty much no field time presence of Astra, or slightly lower field time from Lighter, allowed Ellen to generate more freeze charges and perform more basic attacks. Even without Dial-In though, Ellen, Lighter, Astra Yao wasn't far behind either, clearing in 64 seconds and reaching 25,300 points in Deadly Assault 2, but when comparing this 2nd/3rd place team feel-wise to Dial-In, there really wasn't much of a difference, as both or all 3 teams were technically just on-field Ellen carries, but it is worth mentioning that Dial-In required more pre-planning in order to properly organize Ellen's combo. Ellen's budget team included using Ellen, Lycon Sokaku, Ellen paired with other stunners like Ambi or Kaleda, or pretty much any other available Dazer, but for the final slot, as you'd expect, using characters like Sokaku, Nicole, Lucy, or even Rina could work, though their score and performance definitely suffered compared to the more premium options. Now let's move to Ellen's Mindscapes. Her first Mindscape increases flash freeze points gained during her dash attack to 3 points and charge dash attack to 6 points, and additionally for every flash freeze point consumed, Ellen gains 2 crit rate. For her second Mindscape, this changes the 3rd hit of Ellen's basic so that it can now be followed directly with Shark Nami, and additionally for every flash freeze point gained from her EX special, she gains 20 crit damage up to a maximum of 60. Regarding her 4th Mindscape, this is where Ellen gains 6 flash freeze whenever a squad mate freezes or stuns an enemy, and she also receives the quick charge effect when doing so. On top of all this, however, she also recovers 4 energy. Finally, for her 6th Mindscape, whenever Ellen uses her EX special, chain attack, or gains quick charge, her pen ratio increases by 20% and she gains a stack of Feast Begins up to 3 stacks. Using her charge dash attack, however, will allow her to consume the Feast stacks, and this will increase the attack's damage by 250%. Overall, Ellen's 2nd and 6th Mindscapes are her most impactful, as they offer decent improvements to her damage at roughly 6 and 25% respectively. However, overall her Mindscapes aren't nearly as insane as you'd expect. If you were looking for changes to her quality of life, you could also invest in her first Mindscape, but honestly this isn't nearly as game-changing as other DPS's first Mindscapes. Now let's move to her pros and cons. For her pros, she is an attack agent and technically received a decent buff from Dial-In being released, and on top of this, she is a pretty easy DPS to learn. To add to all this, her W engine is pretty replaceable or has substitutes with all the new attack agents that have been released recently, but in terms of her cons, she is dependent on having premium teammates. Other Ice DPS are definitely performing better than her right now, and despite there being Ice Week bosses, most recent Deadly Assault bosses, aside from the marionettes, are really not ideal for her to fight. Now as a final note, a few members of the community did ask and were still curious about how new/buffed characters like Ellen would perform compared to their initial banners, previous buffs, or even compared to new competitive DPS, and with this, here were a few of my findings. Ellen is definitely someone who received a sizable buff with Dial-In's release, and score-wise, she performs about 27 to 30% better depending on the team lineup, with this translating to about a 5.5 to 5.8 thousand score increase. Despite being iced, there really aren't that many bosses, even if we account for the old Butcher who we haven't seen in a long time, who actually make Ellen stand out as an ice DPS, and with this, at best, Shiyu fights or the occasional marionette in Deadly Assault may be instances where Ellen is strong. However, in general, Ellen doesn't really have a boss where she's specifically strongest. Finally, Ellen's first Mindscape is definitely not super impactful if you were debating on whether you wanted M1 or her signature, but truthfully, Seed and Evelyn's W engines are both pretty good on their own too, which makes the choice of M1 versus signature funny, since you could honestly answer with neither and not miss out on much. With just the 2 factors though, even a buff to Ellen doesn't necessarily make her strong, it just makes her less weak, which does feel somewhat lackluster at times. Even when compared to an agent like Soldier Zero Ambi, the changes and buffs are at least observable and usable against bosses like Typhon or Defiler, both of which appear more frequently. Overall though, despite Evelynn being a worse performer across most bosses and content, the reality is that Ellen isn't necessarily as bad a character, as opposed to she's more just stuck with a set of bosses that she isn't really suited for. As a side note, it is also worth noting that Ellen is competing for the Ice DPS slot with recent releases like Yidhari, a similar attack agent in Hugo, and the most popular DPS in the game Miyabi, which can also affect her appearance and even usage rate. Finally, though it was not explicitly stated in the dev note, Zenless has teased in the past that characters who are weak may receive adjustments or help in the future, and with this I would personally wait until seeing a live stream or future update to see if Ellen/other news buffs/adjustments are coming for characters in the future, but otherwise waiting for a new partner or Deadly Assault rotation may end up making Ellen see play again. We'll just have to wait and see. With this guys, Ellen continues to hold up okay, but definitely not amazingly in today's meta as a season 1 agent, which is both exciting and slightly disappointing for her current state. As the very first limited agent, Ellen will always hold a special place in my heart, and since I've already pulled for her, I'll be cheering on for any of you who decide to pick her up on her rerun, and of course I'll also be waiting to see if she ends up getting changed or something else puts her back into the meta. Thanks again for watching though, I'll see you on the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy, good night.